Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This is going to be the basis of my talk that I've got to do soon. In fact, it's a week tomorrow. And this is based at non-orchid people. So people who may have an orchid or two dotted around the house that may have been given to them, or spur of the moment purchases, that sort of thing. But they are growing people. This is a horticultural society, so they have growing knowledge, they have plant knowledge, but not necessarily related to orchids. So it's a pretty basic talk, and the idea is to spark interest in having more orchids around, knowing that you'll be able to keep them alive. Yeah, so that's the basis of the talk. And you'll have to excuse the croaky voice, but tough. But by adding the soundtrack to this talk, I can do it in bits. So if my throat's playing up or anything, I can stop and start. So that's the idea. So this bit will be me introducing myself and things like that, just to sort of get going. And then we sort of get into the presentation proper. Okay, so orchids in the home then. I'm going to have a chat about their origins, because that will help you understand how they grow. Then we'll have a look at the mass production, which is how the basis of how we get our orchids in the stores and the supermarkets and things like that. And we'll have a look at some care and some culture once we've got the orchids home. So orchids come from tropical forests, the ones we're talking about. Just to get a feel of where they come from, some pictures of some orchids in the wild. Most of the orchids, well, in fact all of the orchids I'm talking about are epiphytes. They grow on trees. Now they're not parasites, they're epiphytes. They attach to the trees purely for support and position. Some of them grow on rocks, yeah? They're still, well, those are called lithophytes, but they still have the basic principle of needing to attach to something to enable them to spread out and grow. Often on rough bark. If you look at this orchid, it's just growing on bare bark. There's no moss or other plants around. It's just attached to a gnarly piece of a tree, and it's growing quite happily there. Notice it's in the sunshine, but it's dappled sunshine. Now orchids, the larger ones, love to do this. They get in a fork of a tree. That way they've got support without having to attach quite so well. And they stay there even in a storm. So yeah, they like to utilise the fork in a tree. But they will hang out on the end of a branch as well. And notice this one. This is in incredibly bright light. And it's quite a large plant for the actual branch it's growing on. But that branch has got moss and stuff, to help keep the roots moist. Some of the orchids hang down, they're pendulous, so they attach themselves and then the canes grow really long, and at the time when they've got their leaves on, they're heavy, so they are pendulous. Some of them are tiny. This is a delicate little orchid. You can see the type of environment it's growing in. It's sitting on top of a large branch that's got moss and other things growing on it. So that's their environment. Now out in the wild, our orchids are under serious threat, and the main reason is us, as usual. Nearly all the wildlife threats are us. Massive deforestation. Huge areas just being cut down with no concern whatsoever for the environment that will never be recreated. It's gone. Poaching. People are going up into the forests and just collecting orchids wholesale and bringing them down to sell, to make some pennies, probably to buy food. You can see the logic. And certainly in Laos, whole forests are cut down, the orchids are stripped off, and then they come across the border into Thailand, where they try and sell them, posing as legitimate sellers. So that's what's going on. Things are slowly changing, but you have to bear in mind, in these poorer countries, people are slowly realising that us Westerners will pay an awful lot of money to go and see these orchids in the wild, so it might be better to leave them there. And these organised trips are getting quite popular now. They're not cheap, but yeah, you get yourself out to this part and get guided tours up into the forests and the mountains if you've got the energy and are fit enough. And a lot of villagers in some places are now being encouraged to cultivate these orchids And this prevents the illegal poaching, basically, because they're on the case. And here you can see a load of villagers sitting around separating orchids to be put back into the wild in suitable places for visitors. So that's the wild bunch. But the orchids we buy in the stores, where exactly do they come from then? Well, first of all, they have never seen the wild. Donkey's years ago they may have originated there, but these have not been in the wild. Orchids tend to produce millions of seeds, tens of thousands to millions. They're wind distributed and they have to land in quite precise places or they won't germinate. But, you know, that's the way they would produce their seed, in pods. And here you can see a progression in a laboratory. On the right, probably thousands of tiny little plants, and then gradually they're moved up through the flasks as the plants get bigger and bigger. But of course that's just 4. It's done on quite a large scale. Yeah? Literally thousands, tens of thousands of plants in that area. And that's not even a big area. This does go on in massive proportions. Again, loads of flasks, controlled light, controlled temperatures, laboratory conditions to get these plants going from their seeds. And they're not all produced by seed, but we'll stick to that for the minute. And then eventually they get potted up and planted out. Literally, as far as the eye can see. Those are all young orchids being grown on in precise conditions. Yeah, so that's their origins, and you end up with a sea of orchids. Again, as far as the eye can see. Do you want to estimate how many there are there? It's not even worth trying, because that's 1 of 6 greenhouses that size at that particular production environment. And then they end up looking something like this, and we go into the stores and we buy them. Those are little mini phalaenopsis. Take up a small amount of space and relatively easy to grow. So that's how we get our orchids. It's a massive production element going on there. Right, the business model of these orchids. These are mass produced. Most of it is automated until the final packing stage, transported and everything. But the business model is designed that you get your plant in flower or coming into flower, and when the flowers finish, you throw it away and get another one. You don't like that, do you? But if you think how much you'd pay for a bunch of roses sat in water, and you throw those away when the blooms start dropping their petals, well, the business model for these orchids is exactly that. They don't expect us to keep these plants alive. They expect us to dump them and go and buy another one. But if you're anything like me, I don't like dumping a healthy plant. So we then get on to the point where we try and look after them and get them to bloom again. So these are the types of orchids you're going to find in the supermarkets, stores, garden centres, readily available, and in the main not too difficult to look after in the home. First one we'll look at is the phalaenopsis, also known as the moth orchid. Let's just have a look at some, just to get a feel for the types of orchids we're talking about. You may not have heard the name before. They have a look to them. They have a very elaborate shaped lip with sort of wings and a spiky bit. Generally a rounded shaped flower. They come in literally all colours and sizes, up to quite large. Some are patterned, some are plain, yeah, and all of these will turn up now and again in the stores. As I say, some are pretty large plants and some are real minis. You can get lovely delicate shades. They don't all have to be shouting loud and blousy. Lovely delicate shades on this one, and patterning. Pure white is quite popular. They've very rarely totally pure white. They've usually got a few spots and a hint of yellow in there somewhere. Very, very plain colours in some cases. Again, that strange shaped lip at the bottom. Basic structure is 3 sepals, 2 petals and a lip. And the lip is in fact an adapted petal, which makes up the 6 elements, if you see what I mean. That's a large plant. Those blooms are 4.5 inches across, so they can get large. Okay, so you've got yourself some orchids, and now you'd like to keep them alive. So this is the bit, this is the culture and care part. Before I get into the more detail, let's just get back to the absolute basics. Remember this business model about throwing them away when the blooms are over? Well, if you have that in mind, all you really need to do with your phalaenopsis is water them. Yeah. The thing with phalaenopsis is they do like to dry in between watering. They're not bog plants. They don't like to stay sopping wet. The roots will rot if you do that to them. So just put them in a place where they've got reasonable light. Don't stand them on a windowsill in the sunshine. Don't stand them on a windowsill above a radiator. They don't like dry air. So reasonable light and temperatures, if you're comfortable, so are they. And water them when they're dry, not while they're still wet. And the blooms will last 2.5, 3 months, sometimes a bit longer, depending on the plant. And you'll have a nice plant to look at for some considerable time for anything from 5 to 10 quid. Not bad going. But if you want to keep them alive a bit longer, first of all, you'll have to think about repotting. I'll be doing a demonstration at the end, so I won't talk about it now. Right, to keep a phalaenopsis alive longer term, you need to find it a comfortable place. So medium light, no direct sun in through the glass unless it's very early morning or late in the evening. They like a reasonable light. They don't need to be in the dark, and they certainly don't want to be in full sun. Certainly during the summer, it will kill the plant. It will burn the leaves off. Yeah, same with the watering, but now you need to think about the quality of your water. And our tap water in this area is not very good for orchids. It's got far too much stuff in it. So you could think about collecting some rainwater or buy some distilled water or something like that, which is viable if you haven't got too many orchids. You will need to feed them. Now you can basically use any fertilizer, quite honestly, but just remember that orchids are low feeders. So your garden fertilizer, nowhere near that strength. You need to get down to about 1/4 of the sort of strength you would use out in your garden and stuff like that. So feed low, yeah, otherwise you can burn the roots. And just basically keep your plant comfortable. But you will need to think about what it's growing in, because they come in organic media. It will eventually break down. When it breaks down, it turns acidic and it will kill the roots. Yeah, that's not the orchid's fault. It's not your fault. It's just that's what happens with the media. So longer term, you will need to repot. But these are pretty easy-going orchids. You know, temperatures that you like, reasonable light level, and they'll do fine. Right, the oncidium types, including intergenerics, which just means the oncidiums are split up into many different types, and you can hybridize across those types, and those are called intergenerics. There's 2 types of genera in there, or more, sometimes a lot more. Let's have a look at some of these then. These come in some of the most brightly coloured orchids. The hybridization program has done wonders. A basic shape, you notice the lip on these is a lot flatter, yeah, often frilly, but all shades of pinks through to deep purple, reds, yellows, oranges. This is one of my favourites. All of these orchids I've got or have had at one point or not. These are all pictures of my own orchids. This is your dancing lady. If you look at it carefully, it looks like a lady in a big frilly skirt with her arms held out. Hence the name, Dancing Lady. If you can ever get hold of this, it's called Sherry Baby. It's a very, very strong fragrance, and it smells of vanilla chocolate. It'll fill the room with fragrance. They do have a more spidery look, some of them, where the petals and sepals are narrow and elongated. You also have the flat, more rounded ones. Again, you can have delicate shades, spotting, blotching, stripes. This is a twinkle. These are tiny little oncidiums that are very, very fragrant. If you can get hold of these, they're well worth having. They're quite diminutive little plants. The spider orchids, the brassicas, these blooms are 8 inches from top to bottom. They're big and they're very fragrant as well. This one comes up quite often. This is Shelob Tolkien. Somebody had a bit of a Lord of the Rings fetish going on here. And my all-time favourite in this part of my collection is this one, and it's just the colour. It's so vibrant. It's a dominant, brilliant yellow colour. Gorgeous plant, that one. Okay, so many shapes and sizes and colours. The plants themselves can vary enormously from quite small to rather large. So you need to have a think about what you're getting hold of here. If you look in the back there, that's a 30 centimetre ruler. Yeah, so this is quite a large plant. You know? You look at the structure of the plant, you've got these pseudobulbs, as they're called, egg-shaped structures with the leaves poking out the top. And at the front here you can see what the new growths look like. Yeah, the pseudobulbs form as the new growths progress. So you've got your new growths at the front, they stay quite narrow until the leaves form, and then the pseudobulb forms at the base. Again, this is quite a large plant. You would need room to accommodate it, and this is still growing. This is going to get bigger. They do get large. This is just a group of Oncidium types, from large to small, not all in bloom at this point in time. If you have a look at the one to the rear on the right, this one's just recently been repotted, and if you look at the structure of the plant, all of the new growths are pushing out on this side of the plant, including some very new spiky ones at the bottom. It's been potted in such a way that those new growths have got room to expand. That's why it looks a little one-sided. Again, there's your 30 centimetre ruler. It doesn't even come up to the top of the leaves, and then you've got the flower spikes sticking out the top. I do grow some of mine on mounted pieces of bark. It's a natural way to grow them. They sit there quite happily once they attach. This is some of the twinkles, some of the smaller Oncidiums. They're all very fragrant, and quite a few colours, from white through the pinks into this one, which is a coppery bronzy colour. That's called Twinkle Cinnamon. Again, another one of my mounted orchids. They attach themselves to the bark, they grow happily, it's their natural environment. Not that easy to look after them like that in the home, because they dry very fast. In the summer I have to water that every single day. Yeah, in the home, with the drier air, that would probably go up to twice a day in the warmer weather. So not ideal for in the home, but they do look good like that. Okay, so that's your basic size and shape of some of the plants, and as I said, you need to be aware that they can grow quite large. It's just you can choose your plant by what it looks like when you buy it. Does it look like it's going to turn into a monster? Excuse me. Okay, so that's a look at some Oncidium types and their sizes and their shapes. Okay, now keeping these alive needs a little bit more thought. These like some air movement, so you might think about a little fan just to keep the air buoyant around them. They don't like stale, still air. They also like moisture in the air, so you might have to think about getting something like seed trays with some gravel in that you can put water in. Don't stand the pot in the water, make sure the pot is raised above it, or again, soggy roots will rot. Yeah, but trying to keep the air moist is a better environment for these. Now these like quite bright light. These do need that light level up. But again, full sun through glass can burn the leaves. So you're going to need some sort of filtration, like a net curtain or something like that. Temperatures for these, again, they'll be comfortable in your house. They don't mind heat. I mean, these will go up to 28, 29 degrees C and still be happy. They'll also be happy at 15, 16 degrees C. But they do like a difference between the day and the night temperature. That's quite important. Sounds like a silly thing, but it does help their metabolism, what's going on inside the plant with the transpiration and things like that. So a little bit more thought with these, a bit of air movement, get some humidity in the air, and get that light level as high as you can without the direct sun coming through the glass on those leaves. They will burn, and it can happen in a very short period of time. But apart from that, they're pretty accommodating. They will grow okay in your home, and can be very rewarding. They're vigorous growers, a lot of these, and they will push up new growths quite frequently. And they can be in bloom almost any time of the year. Yeah, once they've got a happy root system and they're growing well, each new growth that matures will bloom, sometimes 2 spikes per growth. Right, lastly we'll have a look at some of the dendrobiums. Most of these are not suitable to grow in the house, but there are a couple that will work okay. There's 2 main types, what are called the nobile hybrids and the phalaenopsis types, but there is a difference between these two. So let's have a look at some nobile types. These have long canes with leaves alternate up the canes, and they bloom up the full length of the cane. Again, vast array of colours. Notice the lip on these is more of a funnel shape, almost like a daffodil, especially with that colour. So different shaped blooms this time, and often quite large, although some are small. So that's the nobile types. The phalaenopsis types, so named because the blooms do look a little bit like the phalaenopsis that we looked at before. These grow differently. These actually produce canes with leaves at the top, and the spikes come up from the top in amongst those terminal leaves near the top of the cane. But again, some lovely colours, some lovely patterns, and quite accommodating. They will grow quite well in the home. Right, we'll look at some nobile plants. This is their typical shape, and this is what they'll often look like when you buy them. They'll often have 1 or 2 canes covered in blooms, and you can see the alternate leaves going up there like that. That's what they look like when they bloom. Take a good look, because you will probably never see those plants like that again when you look after them in the home. These are mass produced in perfect conditions, light, temperature, humidity, and they also use hormones to dwarf their growth and induce the blooms, which you can't do. So take a good look. But they're impressive when they're in full bloom like that. Don't get me wrong, you can still get them to bloom, that's not a problem. But the first thing that's going to happen is new growths will grow from the base. You've got to get those up to full size. And when you get your plant home and the new growths start, you'll often find they're half as big again as the ones you got when you bought it. They can grow quite tall. But nice compact plants, tall, but they don't spread much. So you've got a tall type plant. That's the nobile types. The phalaenopsis types, as I've said, they have canes with leaves near the top. So the first 2/3 or so of the cane has no leaves. The leaves are at the top. Again, you grow your new growths, get them up to full size, and then they bloom from the apex, directly out of the crown of the cane. Often that's where the first bloom spike will come from, but they can produce 2, and they can also produce spikes from a little lower down, like below the first couple of leaves. So that's their pattern. And they have long arching spikes in the main, sometimes with a large number of blooms as well. Both of these nobile types, some of them are fragrant, but not all. Some of them have no fragrance at all. But they often make up for it in sheer weight of numbers of actual blooms. These are quite easy to keep, probably easier than the nobiles, because these just grow throughout the year. They don't really have a season as such, or seasons don't get involved here. So that's the 2 types we're going to talk about, and they're readily available. They turn up, you should be able to get them. Okay, back to the nobile types. Now these are easy to care for, but getting them to rebloom means you need to try and imitate some of the conditions they would have in the wild. Somewhat. The hybrids are more easygoing than the actual species. But you need to know the annual cycle. So starting in late winter, early spring, they bloom. And around that time they will also start their new growths. And as the new growths push on, they will also produce new roots. That's quite important because that's your time when you repot, when those new roots start. Those new growths need to be fed and watered well throughout the growing season, because in the UK their growing season is quite short. As you get into the autumn, you need to ease off with the watering and the feeding, because they like to be pretty dry in the winter. Not desiccated dry, but cut it right down, and in the winter they need the brightest light you can give them. It helps induce the buds. And also during that winter period, they like to be cool. So something like a cool room, an unheated room on the windowsill in the sunshine, they'll do fine. Yeah? And cut the feed down as you get into midwinter, and just a dribble of water every now and again. And eventually you will see those buds forming up the canes, and that's the time, as those buds start to swell, to think about increasing your watering a bit and start reintroducing your feed to make sure those buds have got something to work with, and the cycle begins again. So it's an annual cycle, and you do need to try and imitate that to one degree or another. You might get away without doing too much, but you'll have to do some of it. Right, the phalaenopsis type are called continuous growers, so they grow throughout the year. They can push up new growths any time, so they are different. And if they are actively growing, they need to be fed and watered well. If there's no growth going on, there's no point in giving them lots of food and water, because they won't use it, and you'll end up with soggy roots that can rot. So water and feed when growing, and that really applies to all orchids. So these need good light year round, so you don't have to worry about messing with the light. They also like to stay warm, so that's pretty easy going. But you will need to give these good light or they won't bloom. Apart from that, these are pretty easy going. Shade from bright sun through the glass, so summer shading. But apart from that, just good light, good warmth, and feed and water well when actively growing, which can be any time of year, so you'll have to adjust your watering and feeding depending on what the individual plant's doing. And they should work quite well. Right, now some more detailed culture by orchid type. This is where we get down to the bit you've probably been waiting for, is how to really look after these and become like an orchid grower. Yeah, but you need to get to know your plants. So first, some general points. No orchids come from desert environments. They like air movement and humidity in the air, for a start. Yeah, they'll all need watering and they'll all need feeding, but that can be at different times of year quite different, from almost nothing to almost drowning them. But nearly all orchids that you're going to come across like to be almost dry before they get watered again. If you keep them soggy, the roots will rot. They're not bog plants, yeah? But if you can increase your humidity and get a bit of air movement with a little fan, keep your temperatures around right, they're going to do okay in your home. Okay, as I said before, the light levels for phalaenopsis, reasonable light. These don't like high light, so there's no need to give it to them. North-facing windowsill would be fine, and you wouldn't need to shade them because they're not going to get any sun. If they're in a sunny window, you will need to shade them. But the easy way is to just move them back from the window slightly. That will reduce your light. Again, temperatures, if you're comfortable, so are they. If you're sat round in your hat and coat, then it's too cold for your orchids. Yeah, so normal room temperatures are fine. And with the watering for phalaenopsis, make sure they dry in between watering, but don't leave them dry for any length of time. So just keep your eye on what they look like. The roots go a silvery colour when they're dry. When they're wet, they go green. So they'll tell you when they need water. Yeah. Feeding with these, they do need a reasonable amount of food when they're actively growing, when the new leaves are forming. They do occasionally drop an old leaf off the base. It'll turn yellow and fall off. Try not to pull them off, you'll tear them, but they do drop occasionally, and that's the way they grow, so don't worry about that. But these are easygoing plants to look after, quite honestly. They're the easiest of the lot. They should do well. The Oncidium types, you have got to watch these light levels. These do like high light, yeah, so you need to find a place for them that is good light, yeah, without direct sun coming in through the glass, and they should do well. Same sort of temperatures as the phalaenopsis, just room temperatures will be fine. These don't mind getting a bit cooler now and again, but you know, it's better if they don't. When these are actively growing, they will drink, yeah, so they need watering and feeding pretty well when they're actively growing. They will drop leaves off of older bulbs from time to time, but these are being replaced by the new growths. Yeah, so it's a progressive thing that they do. The older bulbs drop their leaves, the newer ones replace them, and those newer growths will grow new root systems to go with them. So again, pretty easy going. These like a bit of moisture in the air though, they don't like dry air. And while you're talking about orchids in the home, watch your curtains. Don't draw your curtains at night and leave your plant on the windowsill, especially in the winter. That temperature near the glass can get very cold. So watch that sort of environment. Don't shut your plants off from your normal room temperatures, especially these. They can, you know, they can burn with cold burn if they touch the glass when it's freezing cold out. The nobly types, given that annual cycle, you can play tricks on these. Keep the light levels lower during the growing season so that as you head into winter, the increase in light is more dramatic. You play a trick on them. Temperatures for these, growing season, normal room temperatures, but they do need that cooling down process in the winter, so you need to be prepared to find them a cooler room with the brightest light possible. When they're growing, feed and water well. During that winter, you could call it a sort of rest when they're not doing much. Yeah, they won't need any feed and they'll need very little water, but they still need a bit or the canes will start shriveling. Yeah, these will drop their leaves on older canes and they'll become totally leafless, and the newer canes will replace them. Again, that's the progression, that's the way they grow. But apart from the little bit of seasonal adjustments, quite easy. The phalaenopsis type are continuous growers, so they like to be warm all the time. Yeah, a bit like the phalaenopsis, but again, they do like those higher light levels and they do like a bit of humidity in the air. So again, these you need to watch. Your watering and feeding is geared up to what the plant is doing. And if it's pushing up new growths, it's in active growth, it will take more water and feed to get those canes to grow up to full size in whatever season they decide to grow, because they can push up new growths at any time of year. Unlike the nobly dendrobiums that tend to push them up in late winter, early spring, because they have an annual season. These don't really have that seasonal adjustment. So quite honestly, they're easier to look after, yeah? But they do need good light. And again, watch any drops in temperature. These don't like to get cold. So nice even temperatures with a bit of a drop at night, but most houses do that naturally, so you don't have to worry too much about that. It's not a precise thing. Okay, so hopefully that's sort of sparked your interest with any luck, and if so, I got told to rustle up some custom. So if you're interested in seeing more orchids, Wessex Orchid Society have a show coming up on the Saturday the 9th of March, and that's at Porchester School. I can get you details if you need them. They meet once a month in Shawford Village Hall, which is just north of Otterbourne off the M3, sort of easterly way, and they have 2 social events, 2 shows, Christmas do and a summer garden party, and all are welcome. And now the big one. The Bournemouth Orchid Society, the other one I belong to, has their 60th anniversary coming up. It's a 2-day event on Saturday the 30th and Sunday the 31st of March, which I believe is Mother's Day, and it's at Highcliffe Castle. And it'll be one of the largest orchid events for the foreseeable future, quite honestly, with Brexit coming up. So it's a good day out. Yeah, there's parking available, there's a kiddies area, there's a cafeteria there, traders there with a multitude of orchids for sale, and if you've never been there, how about this for a venue for an orchid show? We're taking over the whole place. Every room in the place will have stuff going on to do with orchids. It's a magnificent building in itself, let alone when it's full of orchids. So Stick it in your diary. I've brought some leaflets with me, which you're welcome to take away. But try and make that a date. Yeah, end of March. Treat your mum. Come along as a Mother's Day event. Okay, so that's the idea with that. And I'm now going to have a closer look at some actual orchids that I brought with me, and then I'm going to have a go at repotting a couple so that you can actually see that process, because it is actually quite important if you wish to keep your orchids long term. And apart from that, thank you.